Okay, I have a bone to pick with my TikTok algorithm because why did I only get positive reviews of this book until I read it and I enjoyed it, and then all I'm seeing is like that trend where people say books that they can't believe people actually like, and it's always this book. I like it, I'm people. So I wanted to make this video. It's kind of a defense of the series, but it's also not, because I'm going to talk about why I liked it, but also some of the negative reviews I've seen and some of the reasons that this book series just isn't for everyone. And I think it's very valid why people don't like it, but I do. To start with, I'm going to talk about why I started reading it. So like I said, I got a lot of positive reviews on TikTok for this book, The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, and I did not think I was going to like it. I did not think I was going to like it at all. I used to work in a bookshop. I don't work there anymore, but we had a TikTok bay of books that were popular online, that were trending, and it was in that book section. And I used to be a little bit naughty at work, and I used to read the books behind the till because it was a very quiet store and sometimes we didn't have customers. So I had a very quiet day, and I just thought, I'm gonna pick up this book and just see what the fuss is about, because I kept seeing these reviews and some people loved it, some people hated it, but mainly positive. And I picked it up and I just kept reading it, and then I just ended up buying it because I was so desperate to read it on my day off. And then I bought the whole series, so I now have quite a little book collection of the series, and that's not even all of them or all of the ones that I've read, because there's another 2 that I borrowed from the library. So I've read most of them, but I'm going to get into that in a minute. But yeah, it's mainly marketed as a romantasy. It's really, I just see it as a fantasy series. It's a YA fantasy, and it revolves around fairies and this magical world of fairy, which kind of exists alongside the human realm, and people can kind of pass through the two. So it's split into a few different collections. So the whole series overall is called the Folk of the Air series, but I generally refer to it as the Cruel Prince series because that is the first book in the series. So the first section, if you will, is the Cruel Prince Trilogy, which is these 3 books. So it's The Cruel Prince, The Wicked King, and The Queen of Nothing, in that order. So these books revolve around the main character Jude and her 2 sisters Taryn and Vivian. The book starts with their parents being murdered by what turns out to be the father of Vivian, who is her older sister. Now Vivian is a fairy, but Taryn and Jude are mortals, they're humans. So when they're all brought to the fairy realm to be raised by Vivian's father, then there's a bit of almost like a culture shock of them having to grow up in this world that is not built for them. And the world is quite dangerous for mortals because they can easily be enchanted, and there's a lot more risks for them. But the main advantage that they have is that they are able to lie, whereas the fairies are not able to lie. This is one of the things I really like about this series, is the way that Holly Black manipulates language so that the fairies are not able to directly lie, but they are allowed to manipulate the truth and just refuse to say things, or say things in a very confusing way that makes you think that they've told you something that they actually haven't. That's the main series. It revolves mainly around Jude as she grows up, and there's also a kind of main plot going on with the kingdom of fairy, kingdom of Elfhame as it's called, and the kind of battle for the crown. The king has a lot of children who are all kind of their own little political factions, and Jude kind of then gets caught up in this, mainly through her then relationship with Cardan, who is the youngest of the king's children. So it is marketed, like I said, as a romantasy. I personally don't think it really fits into that category, but I will get onto that in the section on why people didn't really like it. But it does have a romance plotline. It also has a main plotline which is partly just about Jude and her growing up, but also about this kind of political intrigue and the battle for the throne. So there's a lot of kind of double crossing and different factions all kind of battling it out, and Jude trying to stay on top in a very difficult situation. So then moving on to the next section, if you will, there is some bonus content in some ways, which is this lovely hardback, which I actually bought really recently and I'm still a bit obsessed with, which is How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories, which is kind of a bonus, it's described as a bonus novella. It's essentially short stories that is from Cardan's perspective, and it fits in after the main trilogy, and it kind of fits in around the story of the Cruel Prince trilogy. Yeah, like I said, a bit more depth into Cardan's character, a bit more about what he was up to in the trilogy, in the parts that we didn't see. I think it's a really nice companion to the series, but the main thing that I really like about it are the illustrations. It's an illustrated series, and it's an illustrated hardback, and it is just really, really beautiful. I'm just really obsessed with the pictures in it. I'd really recommend getting a hardback because it is just really beautiful. Yeah, so I think the stories are fun, but mainly just the cover, the illustrations, everything is just really beautiful. The short stories don't really add anything in terms of big revelations about the plot or anything really essential, so I think you can skip it, especially if you maybe don't want to spend the money on the hardback. But if you do really love the series, then I do think it's definitely worth a read. The other thing I would say is to read it in the order they came out, instead of like I did and waiting until you'd read the other books and then going back and reading this one, because I kind of skipped it thinking I wouldn't really want to read it. But I actually did enjoy it, and I think it would have been good to read it when the trilogy was fresh in my mind, because I read it after I read the next two books, which are set further in the future, so they don't really fit in as well. But I do think also that the short stories kind of feed quite well into the duology that I'm about to talk about, because they have a little bit more information about some of the aspects of Elfhame which become important in the duology. So yeah, if you are going to read it, maybe read it fresh off the trilogy. So the other companion piece actually that I should talk about before I get onto the duology is there is a bit of bonus content from the trilogy, which is the letters that Cardan writes to Jude in exile. You can buy it as an ebook. It's literally called The Letters from Cardan to Jude in Exile. But you can also find it online really easily. I'd really recommend reading that. It's literally just a few pages, but as you can imagine, there's a part where Cardan sends Jude letters while she's in exile, and those are those letters which Jude never receives in the book, so you never actually hear the content of them. But I think they're a really fun bit of character development for Cardan, and yeah, I'd really recommend reading them if you enjoyed the series and you want to know what he said. But yeah, it was only in a Barnes & Noble edition, so we wouldn't have got that. I don't think it would have been in any of the editions in the UK, but you can read online, like I said, so that's another little tidbit. So moving on to the kind of second big part of the series, which is the Stolen Heir duology, which follows the runaway queen of the Court of Teeth, who is quite a minor character in the original trilogy. She's called Siren, but is now nicknamed Ren in the duology, and then it mainly focuses on her interactions with and relationship with Oak, who is a slightly more main character in the trilogy, but both of them are children when the trilogy takes place, and this is then a few years into the future when they're now in their teens, and the kind of adventures that they get up to. I think it's a really nice addition to the series, and I really enjoyed it. It did take me a while to warm up to the characters because, like I said, they're quite minor characters in the original trilogy, so it was kind of, I felt like I was trying to remember who they even were at the beginning or anything that you know about them. But I mean, Oak was more of a main character, so I think once he comes in, it kind of made a bit more sense to me. And there's also a really nice subplot, romance subplot with two of the guards, which I believe also feature in the main trilogy, but I did not remember them. So there's quite a lot of recurring characters and things like that, which are really fun, and again, it's just set in the same world of Elfhame, and I think that the Stolen Heir duology gives a really nice breadth of a bit more of the world, because you kind of move out of just the kingdom that the main trilogy takes place in, and you kind of move into some of the other realms, which you do see a bit in the last book of the trilogy, but it has more of like a road trip vibe in the first book, I think, of the duology. And you get to see some like different corners of the world that you haven't seen yet. So I really enjoyed that aspect. I think also just the kind of road trip energy of it is really fun. I mean, I was saying road trip, it's a bit more violent than that. It's more of little battles than they are, how do you have an end goal of essentially trying to kill someone, so there is that. But yeah, I think that the way I think of a road trip book, that they're kind of moving between places and they've got these kind of little side quests on the way, and yeah, I think it's a really fun first book of the duology, and then the second one's more about character development, I think, and all of the relationships that are built up in the first book. And then you also get a little cameo from our favourite student Carden in the second one. So I think, yeah, it's a really good addition, and once I got into it, couldn't put it down. Much like all of the books in this series, I just think they're such fun reads, and I really just, once I was in, and I just tore through them. So before I get into the nitty-gritty of why people hate these books, I just wanted to talk about some of the other bonus content which I haven't read. So one of them is The Visit to the Impossible Lands, which is a companion short story which is told from the perspective of characters from Holly Black's 2002 series, Modern Tale of Fairy. So something I didn't know before I did the research for this video is that her 2002 series is based in the same world as the Cruel Prince series. Well, I guess technically it's the other way around, because this 2002 one came first. But I think that's really interesting. I think it's really fun when authors do that now, and you kind of have this crossover between some of the different worlds that you've built. I probably won't go and read the Modern Tale of Fairy, because it is a bit more of a children's book, I believe. It's kind of marketed as 12 plus, so it's in that kind of older readers in the children's category, whereas The Cruel Prince is very much young adult. If you are a huge fan of the series, then, and you just want more, then that might be the place to look for it, although I do hope there might be more content coming soon. The other one I haven't read, which I probably will read, is The Lost Sisters, which is another companion novella, which is from Taryn's perspective, so it's from Jude's sister's perspective. I didn't particularly like Taryn that much. I didn't think she was a particularly well-developed character, but it's about her relationship with Locke, which I found a really interesting storyline and made me like Taryn more as a character, because there was a bit more going on there. So I definitely think that would be an interesting read. I do think it was probably going to be quite a dark read, considering how that storyline plays out if you've read the novels. But yeah, I think it would be interesting to see more of that relationship. So that one I might come back to. In terms of there being more content, I fundamentally believe that there is going to be a sequel, potentially a sequel series like the duology or another trilogy that is going to take place in the underwater kingdom based on the ending of the duology and the references there. I'm saying this like it's my opinion. It is my opinion. I feel like other people have probably talked about it as well, but yeah, that's kind of what I got from the end. It felt like she was teasing that, because there's a reference to there being a kind of battle of suitors for Nicasia, I don't know how to say her name. There's a battle of suitors for Nicasia, who is a character who is a friend of Carden's initially, and was the heir to the kind of underwater kingdom of fairies. And there's this battle of suitors hoping to be the next monarch of the underwater kingdom at her side. So there's kind of a reference to the fact that Carden and Jude might have to go to the kingdom and witness and oversee this as it's kind of getting out of hand, and I think that would be a really fun storyline to follow. But yeah, as of yet I don't know anything about there actually being confirmation on this. The other thing I thought was interesting is they actually have tried to make a film adaptation. If I say try to make, very early stages they were trying to sell the rights to it, I believe, and I think that's a really interesting choice. I'm not really sure how well it would turn into a film. I'm always a bit nervous about them making books that I enjoy into films, because I feel like frequently they don't do it with great budget or with great care, and they don't turn out super well. I think it could be cool to see the characters come to life, but yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not particularly confident about enjoying a film adaptation of it, but interesting to know that they're thinking about it. Anyway, moving on to the part that everyone is excited for, which is the tea. Why do people hate this book so much? Why do people not like it? I saw so many reviews where people have said that they just hated it, they can't understand why people like it, they put it down, they DNF'd it, they just could not get through this book. So I've kind of made some notes of why people didn't like it, and then let's talk about it. Let's see what you think, if you liked it, or if you didn't like it, maybe this is why you didn't, or maybe you have a bunch of other horrible opinions you want to put in the comment section. No, I am joking though. I mean, it is up to you whether you like a book or not. It's very much personal opinion. There's plenty of popular books that I also did not like, could not get behind, and there's other books like these ones that I really enjoyed, but I know that other people have really not enjoyed. So particularly with this one, I think people didn't really like the plot, or they couldn't really get into it. I will say the plot is very chaotic. I really enjoyed that about it, but I completely understand why people wouldn't, particularly if you read stuff with more complex plots. If you're the kind of person that really enjoys a good mystery or thriller and you really like kind of guessing what's going to happen, I do think there is a certain care and kind of cleverness that's put into some of those plots that I don't think is really in this book. But I also don't think it's really meant to have that kind of elevated political intrigue plot. I think it's kind of meant to be this messy, chaotic, kind of every man for themselves kind of situation. And I really enjoyed that kind of part of it, and it just felt for me, with the characterization of the fairies as just being creatures that would go after anything they want. They just do things without thinking about the consequences, and you see that in the way they interact with each other and their romantic relationships, that they just kind of impulsively do things. So it did make sense to me that when it came to politics, they would also be impulsive and chaotic, and they wouldn't actually have any forethought about what they actually wanted to happen. So yeah, to me it made total sense, but if you wanted that kind of elevated political plot, then you might not find it in this book, and that's completely fair enough. Similarly, I feel like some people who've been reading this book have kind of been forcing themselves to read it because it's popular and because fantasy is a really big genre in this year and last year. But if you don't really like fantasy, or you don't like fantasy in the same way that I enjoy fantasy, then you might not enjoy it, because there's quite a lot of like relevant details, and there's lots of scenes which maybe don't move the plot forward, but they give you a bit of extra information about this world. And that's what I really enjoyed about it, was I just love imagining this world and how it works, and how the fairies interact with each other, how their culture is different than the mortals, and things like them not being able to lie, how that comes across, how that influences their society. But if you're not really into fantasy and you find it hard to wrap your head around these kinds of worlds, then maybe you wouldn't enjoy this so much, and maybe this just isn't the book series for you. Similarly, the style of the book, people again were talking about how they really didn't like the style of it. It is young adult and it is written in first person, so if you don't really like Jude as a main character, or you don't really like young adult books, then it's probably not for you. I will say the duology does have a different perspective, because the first book in the duology is written from Ren's perspective and the second one is written from Oak's perspective. So maybe if you really want to like this book but you don't like Jude, then you could try the duology, because I don't think you really need to have read the trilogy to understand fully. I think you could probably wrap your head around it. It does help to have read the trilogy, but I do think that you could probably pick it up if you just started with the duology. But again, probably if you don't like Jude, you might not like the other characters either. Yeah, I quite enjoy a YA book. I know a lot of people just don't, and that's completely fair. You know, they are aimed at younger people, so if you want to read something that's more elevated and has more complex language, then that again is completely fair. I just quite enjoy the fact that they tend to be more simple and lower stakes, and I just find them fun and easy reads. I mean, these books did not take me long to read at all. I kind of breezed through them, and whilst I do like having a challenging book every now and then as well, I like to kind of have the balance and sometimes just pick up something that I know is going to be just fun and easy and it's going to make me laugh, which these did. I just enjoyed it for the romance and the comedy, so yeah, but that's definitely one reason people don't like it, is the style. And it's also why I thought I wouldn't like it, but I actually did just warm up to Jude as a main character, which I'll talk about in why I liked it as well. The other thing, which I wasn't sure whether to include in this video because it seems a bit silly, but I'm going to include it anyway, is the fact that there's no spice, there's no spicy scene in these books. They are young adult. They're very much young adults, so there is like a little smooch, nothing more than that. And yeah, the only reason I wanted to include this, because it does seem obvious that they are YA books and therefore will not have these scenes in them, is partly because a lot of people are talking about the blurring of the lines between how these kind of adult books are being marketed as if they are young adult, and so people are kind of now, I think, doing the reverse and having this expectation that young adult books are going to have those kinds of scenes in them if they're romance, which obviously a lot of them, well, none of them should do, because they shouldn't be in the YA category if they do have those scenes. Also the fact that it's being marketed as romantasy, and so like I said, I picked it up at work and it was literally on a shelf next to A Court of Thorns and Roses and Ali Hazelwood's books and a bunch of other like popular romantasy books which are not young adult and are in fact like new adult or adult fiction. So putting it kind of next to that, I do understand how people would maybe pick it up thinking it was very much in the same category as these other books, whereas it's very much not. I don't think it really fits into the romantasy genre as neatly as some of the other books do, because I think there's kind of an expectation with romantasy that it's more focused on the romance, and I don't think this one is as heavily focused on the romance as a lot of the other ones, which is probably why I enjoyed it more, because I'm realising that I love a romance subplot, but I'm maybe not the biggest fan of romance books. So yeah, if you want your spicy books, this is not the place to look for it. So finally, I want to talk about what I rated them and why I actually liked them, why I'm making this video. I will say I didn't rate them 5 stars. I think some of them, I mainly rated them 4 stars or 4.5 stars. I'm quite an emotional rater, so if I really enjoy something, even if I don't think it's objectively good, then I will probably still rate it quite highly. And this was kind of that, where it's like, I don't think these books are incredible. And this is why I didn't rate them 5 stars, is I've read a lot of books which I've really enjoyed, and I've also thought like these are so different, these are so unique, these are doing something different with literature that I haven't seen before, these are just really these should be really critically acclaimed, etc, etc. Whereas with these ones I was like, I really enjoyed them, but there were kind of moments where I was like, this isn't the best writing, or you know, the plot wasn't the strongest, etc, etc. So I did kind of see some faults with them as well, which is partly why I wanted to make this video, because I wanted to say that I do understand why people don't like them, but I did. So but yeah, I think the main thing for me that I really enjoyed and really related to was, I think Jude as a main character was really interesting. I think I was getting a bit tired of some of the main characters, the female main characters in the kind of fantasy and romantasy books that I've read recently, where they just seemed quite two-dimensional. They only seemed to really care about their love interest, and a lot of the plot was just not very strong, and they just kind of were going along with things and they didn't have any agency, whereas Jude is very much in control of the situation mainly, or she's kind of like rolling with the punches and then trying to manipulate things to her own benefit. And I think her character development over the series is really interesting, because she kind of starts off trying to get that agency, and then she realizes at points that she doesn't really want to have to make the decisions, and also then that she can then make the wrong decisions and feel bad about it. So there's definitely a lot of strength in her as a main character, but I think there's also this kind of development about her morality and her emotional vulnerability, and the fact that she really wants to be strong at the beginning, and then she kind of realizes that there's also strength in not being strong and taking a step back and thinking about who she actually cares about and who might get hurt by her moving ahead her political agenda. So yes, I really enjoyed her as a main character. I think that she was quite relatable. I think that it was a good portrayal of how it feels to be in a world that seems like it's not built for you, or that is against you, because she is having to do those extra steps to get in to somewhere, for example, kind of getting into the political sphere, getting into the royal court and moving her way up in society. She's got these additional barriers where people are more likely to take advantage of her because she's mortal, and she also doesn't understand the world as much because she's not grown up there, she's not got this history and this connection to it. So I think you can pick a lot of metaphors out of that, but I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and to me it felt quite feminist. This idea of her fighting against a world that's against her, and ultimately kind of coming out on top. The other thing which I've kind of already talked about is just the world of this book. I really enjoyed the fact that it's built on folktale and the kind of existing ideas people have about fairies and the fairy realm, whether it's kind of the idea of changelings or different types of fairies and the way that they might take advantage of humans. I think there's definitely a lot of folktales about fairies being kind of evil and doing bad things. So it's kind of pulled on that and said, okay, these are these beautiful magical creatures, but they're also can be shady and they can do bad things and they can take advantage of people, and they have these powers and they don't necessarily use them in a good way. So I think that was a really fun world to build a story on, and again, like I said, about fairies only being able to tell the truth, and the way that Holly Black uses that is really, really fun. And she also uses it in terms of Jude as this character being immortal, being amortal, not immortal. With Jude being mortal, then the characters are more distrusting of her because they know that she can lie, and so they think, why would she ever tell the truth if she doesn't have to? So I think that's a really interesting character trait of both the fairies and of Jude, and this kind of contrast between them. Similarly, I'm also a big fan of the Gothic genre, and it felt like it didn't really fit into the Gothic, but it did seem kind of inspired by it. And if you don't know what the Gothic is, it's kind of Dracula, Frankenstein, a lot of, again, kind of beautiful but evil creatures, where you kind of get taken in by them and lose your senses, but they are ultimately a force for evil. I think the fairies in The Cruel Prince are not evil, but definitely some of them are, and I think they're kind of a chaotic neutral, if you will, as they're not really a force for good either. I think the other thing that I haven't really seen anyone talk about is also the LGBT representation in this series. It's not got an LGBT main character or a main LGBT or queer love story, but there are queer characters, and there's a sapphic romance subplot in the main trilogy, and then there's also a MLM or Archelian, I'm hearing people refer to it as, subplot romance in the Duology. So I think it's really nice to see now that LGBT characters are being included in these kinds of books, even if they are more in the background. I just think it adds a bit more of a well-rounded idea of these worlds. Also, the fairies I always forget about this, but the fairies are pretty much, I don't know if this is deliberate, but I feel like the impression that I got is pretty much all of the fairies are some shade of bisexual, because there's a lot of queer relationships or like dalliances that happen between fairies and their various partners. There's a lot of dalliances, there's a lot of people getting with each other. There's a lot of references to different relationships between fairies and them having partners and also having affairs, and it's kind of linked into the political intrigue part, but there's also just this overwhelming idea of the fact that the fairies will just do whatever the hell they want and damn the consequences. So it kind of feeds into that there's not really a stigma about it in the fairy realm. Finally, I've kind of already touched on this, but I really enjoyed that it's more of a slow burn romance and it's not too in your face with the romance. I've mentioned in my last video, and I probably will mention again, that I'm realising I'm not the biggest fan of romance fiction. I do like it, and I have liked romance fiction in the past, but I think that some of the contemporary romance fiction that's coming out is just not for me, because I prefer a slower build and more character development, which doesn't necessarily fit with the way that people are writing romance fiction at the moment, and it tends to work better for me when it's like a subplot too, and there's more other stuff going on, which means people can kind of stretch it out over a longer period of time. And that very much felt true for this series, because there is a subplot romance, but it doesn't really, there's only kind of, you get bits and pieces, and it only really kind of comes together in the third book, so it's quite a long stretched out romance, which is exactly the kind that I enjoy. So that was very fun for me. Overall, I think this book series is one that I kind of struggle to know if to recommend to people, because I know that a lot of people just didn't like it. I quite enjoy that I do own the books, so I can lend them to people if they want to try it out, but it's kind of hard to pin down whether people are going to like it, because it just seems to be such a Marmite book series that people love it or they hate it, and I haven't really seen a lot of in between. So I guess this video is trying to be the in between, because I've kind of tried to cover why people do like it, why people don't like it, although I am obviously incredibly biased because I really enjoyed this series. So yeah, let me know in the comments if you enjoyed it, if you didn't enjoy it. Feel free to tell me you hated it, but just say it nicely if you can. And yeah, I will try to shut up about this book series now, because I feel like this was a very long video. As always, subscribe for more of my content and give it a like if you liked this video, even if you didn't like the books. But yeah, stick around even if you hated this series, because I read a lot of very different books, so I'm sure you will like something that I recommend. And yeah, thank you for watching.